Sorry about that. We're having some real intense technical difficulties right now, and the computers are kind of kicking our butt. But we endeavor to move on. In the last video that we were watching was Taylor Cook's video, member of SDS, that's Students for a Democratic Society, as well as the FRSO, or the Freedom Road Socialist Organization. And she's talking about student worker solidarity. So we're going to hop right back into that video, and hopefully it works better this time. If not, then we will proceed without the visuals, and perhaps each speaker can, over the Zoom call, just kind of talk about their experience. So that way everybody can still get the content that's necessary. You know, what we want out of this event is not to feel defeated. What we want is to feel empowered. And I think that that's the most important thing that we can get out of this. So if these videos continue to give us a lot of trouble, then we'll just continue with the audio. So thank you all so much for bearing with us. We appreciate you so much.
Hello, my name is Taylor, and I'm a member of both Freedom Road Socialist Organization and Tampa Bay Students for a Democratic Society. And for this May Day presentation, I'm going to be talking about student solidarity with workers and the labor movement. So I've been in SDS for almost 2 years now, and we've supported workers in many different ways, whether that be through organizing protests with workers and local unions, giving speeches at other worker rallies, and attending union meetings and contract negotiations both on and off campus. And the unions we have worked with so far in our local Tampa area has been Hillsborough School Employees Federation, the on-campus AFSCME Union, and the USF Graduate Assistants United. And then, so that's pretty cool. And then in terms of coronavirus recently, we, as Tampa Bay SDS, have decided to take up a campaign for USF to provide COVID-19 relief for both students and workers. So soon after classes were moved to online and school was canceled about a month ago, we talked with the on-campus AFSCME Union and asked kind of what are their demands so far, and we found out that they have a petition demanding paid leave for workers. So USF administrators haven't really provided any relief for workers in any way, and instead they're making workers still use their whatever paid time off that they have, instead of adding any additional paid time off. And they've also sent emails to employees offering different paycheck loan programs instead of actually providing any relief to workers. So it's really kind of disgusting the way USF has responded and treated its workers in this situation. So
Okay, well, we gave it a good shot with those videos. But for now, what we're actually going to do is we already have the speakers here, so we're going to try and hear from each of them in person, and they can kind of give you a basic rundown of what would have been in the video. So that's what we're going to do now. So we'll actually start at the very beginning, because that's the first video that we missed. Well, except for the Fronte Popolare, which was fine, and I'm glad that one actually came out okay. But Olga, if you wouldn't mind going ahead and coming off of mute and telling us about your experience as a NYC health worker.
The end of March is when the CDC launched the new guidelines about wearing regular 95 and face shields for everybody. And also, CDC was telling everybody to wear bandana. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. It should be good for the audio soon here. It's just catching up with the lag. Let me know as soon as you can hear her. Yeah, please do, Ben.
Hi, folks. My name is Olga, and I would be talking briefly about the situation in my hospital where everything started on March 5th when we got our first COVID 19 case on our floor. And it was pretty hectic because we didn't have any guidelines to follow. CDC only told us to wear a regular face shield in case of the patient was ruled out COVID 19. And because of that, many of my coworkers got sick, and it's how everything started in New York. We didn't have any regulations, and we're not prepared at all.
Do you have yours
The
turned
directors are
down?
going to the floors telling us to remove the N95 because you didn't need that, only regular face shield. And then 2 weeks later, they finally told us to wear the N95 with the face shield. And then it's where when we started questioning because we're not protected at all. Many coworkers got sick from that. They also stopped doing huddles every day. The huddles are important because we can speak up about things in our unit. And when we got our first case, they stopped communication, they stopped huddles, and I think it was a way for us not asking any questions. They also said that we didn't have to worry about getting sick because if you get COVID-19, you just stay home for 2 weeks and get paid for it, which is, don't tell this to a worker. Nobody wants to get sick. And you're there to work and you have to feel protected. If there is no proper equipment, we cannot do the work. So that was pretty much the message that we're trying to tell to each other. If there's no PPE, we're not going to the rooms. Also, the hospital that I work, we don't have a union, so we cannot really speak out about things that are happening there. But a way to fight back is pretty much talking about the PPE situation, getting examples from the other nurses aides from other hospitals, watching this, which is very helpful for us to base our fight and our struggles in our hospitals and get benefit from it, which is amazing. So I was able to contact someone outside of the hospital to get us PPE, to get us a better face shield, because our manager didn't care about it when I spoke to her. So I was able to provide that for nurses, aides, nurses, housekeepers. They're going to the rooms without protection. So their work got accumulated because their housekeeping was avoiding to go to the rooms to pick up the garbage and also do their jobs because they also didn't feel safe. So I was trying to talk to each group personally to tell them to escalate the problem to the supervisors in order for them to get their job done and also to help us. So we try to work pretty much the internal communication with the other workers to see how we can organize inside in a way to fight back and get our PPE and things that we need. Many coworkers got sick after 2 weeks. They went back to work, but they didn't feel good at all. They're still working sick. So there is no protection. And it feels like a work in a war zone because we have to work in many units and different floors without proper training, and they're not giving us any feedbacks. So I have many other things to talk about it, but I don't want the video to be too long. If you have any questions, please, you can ask during the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Olga. We really appreciate you, talking about that very last second live. And we, of course, appreciate all that you do for the people of New York City, for the people of this country. Currently we're in a really intense fight for PPE all over the place, but for healthcare workers, it's honestly a crime that they aren't able to get them, and that workers have to struggle so hard just to be safe in their work environment. So with that, we're going to go ahead and move on to our next speaker, which will be Taylor Cooke. She's a member of Students for a Democratic Society, SDS, as well as the Freedom Road Socialist Organization, FRSO.
Hello, my name is Taylor, and as was stated, I'm a member of Students for a Democratic Society, which is a student organization across the country, and we're the Tampa Bay chapter. And today I'm going to talk about kind of, how students can get involved with, labor solidarity and standing in solidarity with workers on this May Day presentation. I also just wanted to say thank you to everyone who has stayed on during these technical difficulties, because it's been super stressful, but we're going to get through it. So yeah, I've been in SDS for a while now, and so far we've kind of supported workers in multiple ways, just in my time of SDS, and we've organized protests with local unions and local workers, given speeches at other worker rallies, and we've attended union meetings and contract negotiations for workers, especially the Hillsborough School Employees Federation, the USF. I go to University of South Florida in Tampa, so the USF AFSCME Union, and then the USF Graduate Assistants United Union. And then right off the bat with the terrible COVID-19, we've very much kept workers in mind as soon as everything started, especially USF workers. So as Tampa Bay SDS, we decided to take up a campaign for USF to provide COVID-19 relief for both students and workers, because USF isn't really providing anything for workers. They haven't provided any additional aid or any additional paid leave for workers. If people want to take time off, they have to use time off that they may or may not have left over. And they also sent an email kind of just offering different loans for workers, which is absolutely disgusting. So, and really quickly, we talked to the AFSCME union on campus, and we discussed kind of what demands they had, and they already had a petition for paid leave for workers and shutting down any non-essential workplaces at USF. And so we shared that petition, and then we decided to have call-in to USF very immediately for, again, COVID relief for students and workers, demanding the same things that AFSCME was demanding of paid leave for workers. And then we started our own petition because we wanted to start a petition specific to students, but we also included the demands for paid leave for workers. And we've also had a call-in to the governor, Ron DeSantis. That was also pretty early on, to provide paid leave for all workers and rent freezes, because that's a very common demand right now, of rent freezes and utility bill freezes, because how are people supposed to pay for their bills if they can't work right now or their hours are severely cut? So yeah, and then for other SDS chapters, again, I represent Tampa Bay SDS, but I know from what I hear from across the country, people are also making demands for workers at their respective universities or respective cities. And they've also included another demand, which I think is super cool, which is hazard pay for workers. And that would just be, paying workers more because they're on the front lines and they're putting their lives in danger right now. And yeah, we just think it's really important to keep workers in mind for, multiple reasons, because they are what are keeping this country running, and also the fact that we as students have kind of power over administration, and we have the time and the ability to organize, and we should be standing in solidarity with other people who are oppressed by these capitalist ruling class. So yeah, and then as the pandemic continues and the university continues to put its workers in danger, we'll definitely keep with our demands of paid leave for workers, maybe tack on something with hazard pay. But it's just really important that we stand in solidarity, especially as we like commemorate May Day. We should definitely stand in solidarity with workers during this time as they put their lives on the line and put themselves in danger. And we as SDS really don't believe that anybody should be having to choose between going to work and their health, but that's the unfortunate reality for essential workers, especially in this day and age. But that's always been the reality. So yeah, we just think it's really important as like students, we have the ability to stand in solidarity with workers, and we should stand in solidarity with workers because they work so hard and they keep the country running. So yeah, thanks.
All right, thank you so much, Taylor, for speaking on that. Thank you so much, Taylor, for speaking on that student worker solidarity. And now we can go ahead and move on to our next speaker, who's going to be Gage Lasharity, who is a UPS worker and also a member of the Road Socialist Organization. So yeah, take it away, Gage.
Thanks. So once again, my name is Gage Lasharity. I'm a rank and file Teamster activist, and I work at UPS. And today I'm talking about my comrades and I's fight for protective personal equipment at our workplace, UPS, and just for a better response on the part of the company. So when this crisis initially broke out, UPS laid out that they would provide paid sick leave to employees, and they would cancel our PCMs, which is sort of just I don't remember what it stands for, but it's the meeting. It's basically just a meeting that we have at the beginning of the day. And so to like go over what all is happening and talk about safety and stuff like that. So that was initially their response. And we, as well as all of our coworkers, definitely felt like this was not it wasn't enough. Like UPS is going to have to work throughout this whole crisis. And it's just, if COVID were to break out in our workplace, it would have been really bad. So, we started talking to our employees, our coworkers. We started talking to our coworkers about, about hand sanitizer, gloves, and masks as basic PPE. And pretty much immediately, like, a lot of people were really up in arms about this. And so, we met with management. Management told us no, that all we needed was the paid sick time. In fact, even Jimmy Hoffa Jr., the president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, said that paid sick time was more than enough for UPS workers to make it through this pandemic. So basically, in response, we decided to contact the media and hold a demonstration outside of our building. There's kind of a street that goes down towards a much larger street that connects our UPS warehouse to the rest of the city. And so we were standing on that street corner and pretty much waved signs to every driver that came in out of the building. Pretty much the entirety of the drivers for our building saw our demonstration. So it was really effective for doing that, and it became the talk of the building pretty much immediately. And from this point on, like, management basically was forced through public pressure to begin to give in to our demands. They provided hand sanitizer, they provided tiny gloves that barely fit, didn't fit my hands, they were small, and basically we knew that we had to continue the pressure. We had to keep them on their toes. So we organized a call-in. We began flyering for that call-in, and we began collecting petition signatures. And basically, before we even had a chance to operate on any of it, the next week, they actually basically met our demands, started providing gloves and masks. However, rather than offering them to everybody, they initially chose the strategy of only giving them to people who asked for them. So that was like one of our big demands, and we were actually eventually able to pressure them into not only offering them to people who asked, but also offering them to everybody. So that was like a fairly successful campaign that we were able to use a combination of media pressure and organizing our coworkers to pressure the company into conceding PPE. However, for us, the next step in the fight is basically is here, and that is the fight for hazard pay. So You know, at Amazon, they have one hazard pay, which is one of UPS's direct competitors. And then at the same time, also Teamsters. We're Teamsters at UPS. It's a national Teamsters contract. It's actually the largest contract in the Teamsters. But Kroger's workers who are Teamsters also were able to win a $2 an hour hazard pay demand. And the sort of argument going behind it is that, well, there was an increased grocery shopping in the period immediately after the beginning of the crisis. So definitely, you know, congratulations to them on winning that. However, we argue that, you know, UPS definitely could make a similar case. In fact, in the last couple of weeks, we've been processing extremely high amounts of volume, 15 to 20,000 more packages per day. And that is taking into account the fact that so many businesses are closed, that UPS has actually lost money during this period because of all these businesses being closed. But even with all of those businesses closed, we have 15 to 20,000 more than we normally would. So that is, as far as residential deliveries, that is an increase. It's a huge increase. And in fact, in the next week, as our awful state will be reopening, it will likely only continue to increase because all of those businesses will once again be getting all of their deliveries. So, you know, this is, to me and to everybody at UPS, you know, this is like really important because the company is going to work as harder than they ever have before. They've been working as harder than they have in a long time. It's near peak season, holiday season levels of work for us. And, you know, we absolutely deserve the $2 an hour. So one of the problems with this is that while PPE was really easy for us to win on a local level by sort of shaming the company into it, the hazard pay demand is going to be a national level issue. So in order for us to win PPE, in fact, the thing about PPE is there are UPS warehouses across the country that still don't have PPE, in fact, and they just haven't had any campaigns to really pressure them into doing so. But hazard pay would need to be basically delivered on a contract level. So, you know, right now, our main goal right now is trying to sort of unite Teamsters across the country. I know that Teamsters in Chicago and Rhode Island are fighting for hazard pay. And also in Tampa, Florida, we're fighting for hazard pay. So we've got a petition that will hopefully be linked. I'll link it in the chat to this video if I can once I'm done talking. And also just mostly take, you know, I mean, one thing that we really want to do is take inspiration from some of the other spontaneous like walkouts and other actions across the country. The fact of the matter is that there have been national level events for Trader Joe's, for Amazon employees in general. And that's definitely, you know, I mean, that is the huge, massive struggle that's happening right now, that the working class fighting back against the bosses. And so definitely, it's a struggle that we want to be attuned to and take a lot of inspiration from. So yeah, that's kind of my little presentation. If you have any questions, be sure to ask during the Q&A, and I'll post that petition link ASAP as soon as I can. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gage, for talking about your experience at UPS. You know, as a part of that struggle, I gotta say, we do deserve hazard pay. But with that, we can go ahead and move on, keep this rolling along. And our next speaker will be Rachel Duff. Rachel Duff is a Latinx teacher, union member, and organizer based in Jacksonville, Florida. Her pronouns are she, her. She organizes with the Jacksonville Community Action Committee and is a part of the Police Crimes FRSO chapter in Jacksonville. She has taught ESL at a public school for 5 years and is involved in advocacy work for her students and their families. Thank you so much for being on, Rachel, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
All right. Hi, everyone. So like Liz said, my name is Rachel, and I'm here representing the Jacksonville Community Action Committee. We're a Black-led community organization organizing our communities for self-determination and freedom. And I'm a public school teacher and a union member. So recently, the campaign that JCAC has kind of been focusing on is our in the Duval County Jail. So currently, Duval County Jail is about 800 prisoners and or inmates over capacity. They're designed to hold 2,189 people, and they're currently holding around 3,000. So, you know, under normal circumstances, that's totally unacceptable. And in the midst of this crisis, it's truly just inhumane. And we are demanding our state attorney, Melissa Nelson, to respond. And we have 4 local demands. The first being the immediate release of all nonviolent offenders. Secondly, testing for all prisoners, inmates, and staff as often as needed. Third, the coverage of treatment for prisoners, inmates, and staff. And lastly, the immediate release of prisoners or inmates who are over the age of 60 and or immunocompromised. This past Friday, so a week ago, we had a Caravan Protest. Dozens of cars came out with signs and showed, you know, solidarity with those who are incarcerated. Signs with the hashtag Free Them All to just kind of put pressure to release these folks in the midst of this. This fully applies to juvenile detention centers as well. Honestly, you know, it should be an easy ask to release all underage detainees, but we know nothing comes without a struggle. So that is our main campaign that Jacksonville Community Action Committee is focusing on. We've seen some decrease in prison population, but we are obviously wanting to see a much greater response for, you know, a place that is already over capacity anyways. So there really needs to be an immediate response to that. So this is also essential for those who are detained in immigration detention centers, as we have seen over and over with just the careless deaths of adults and children at the hands of Customs and Border Control. To them, obviously, the health and safety of detainees are extremely low priority, and that will only be exacerbated in this crisis. COVID has already spread into many detention centers, and you know, not much is being done, of course. Also, undocumented folks are, so this is like a little bit of a gray area, and like if anyone during the Q&A, please, you know, ask questions, or also if you'd like to speak to me personally outside of this. So when it comes for like the stimulus check or unemployment benefits, you know, the large majority of undocumented folks are not eligible for those. So it really lends people to be housing insecure and food insecure. There are some possibilities for you to claim your stimulus package if like you had a previous work visa, or even if you previously had DACA but did not renew. So like I said in my recorded video, you know, if folks have questions about that, like I could definitely have a side conversation. Something else that's like really specifically cruel is spouses of those who are undocumented, like who have an ITIN instead of a social security number, are also not eligible for the stimulus check. So it's just like really feels like it's specifically targeting populations to be struggling in the midst of this. Immigration court is currently closed for non-detained people, and they're rescheduling those for a future date. However, those who are detained, court proceedings are continuing as normal, even though access to legal resources and meetings with lawyers are becoming much more difficult and have been much more difficult because of stay-at-home orders. And then deportations are continuing at a completely normal rate. Actually, deportations of unaccompanied minors have risen sharply in the past few weeks. ICE is still detaining people off of the street and adding to already overcapacity detention centers. A couple weeks ago, dozens of COVID positive folks were deported to Guatemala, you know, so it's spreading the virus in places that have like weaker medical infrastructures due to US imperialism in the first place. So while we have travel bans and immigration bans coming into our country, we are just spreading it without care in other places through the practice of deportation, which, you know, should be abolished. In March alone, About 18,000 people were deported in the midst of this. So like I said, it's a complete, just it's going completely against what we're saying, having a travel ban coming in here, yet like sending all of these folks out of the country. There are already recorded cases of COVID as well as deaths in immigration detention centers. But since the large majority are private for-profit institutions, they routinely hide information. So I'm sure we will never know the true numbers or statistics in that. So overall, that's just kind of what I had in my video. I probably said it a little quicker, but again, my name is Rachel and I'm here representing Jacksonville Community Action Committee in Jacksonville, Florida. And we're just here to stand in solidarity with workers around the world to fight against all oppressive systems and institutions that uphold white supremacy, ultimately to love and protect one another. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. We really appreciate your contributions and the hard work that you're doing in Jacksonville. The people who have been hit hardest by
You're
this
on mute,
crisis,
Liz.
of course. Thank you, Rachel. We really appreciate all the work that you're doing in Jacksonville, as well as being on this program in order to talk about your experiences. So without further ado, we can go ahead and move on to the next speakers, which is going to include Connor Monroe. Connor is an anti-war activist who lives in Miami. He's a lead organizer with Power, People's Opposition to War, Imperialism, and Racism. Recently, he's focused on building solidarity with Colombia and Palestine and stopping U.S. aggression against Venezuela, Iran, and Syria. And then Cassia Lamb is a public school teacher in South Florida and longtime activist in the Florida anti-war movement. She co-founded the South Florida anti-war group Power, the same one Connor's in, and has served on the United National Anti-War Coalition Administrative Committee for 5 years now and helps lead anti-war work for the FRSO. So thank you so much, Connor and Cassia, for being here and talking about the U.S. response, socialist response.
Yeah, for sure. Hi, everybody. So thank you, Liz, for that awesome introduction. Today, we were asked to talk about how COVID-19 is impacting the international situation and how U.S. imperialism is responding to the crisis. And just to summarize what was in our video, I think the key point is that COVID-19 is revealing a fundamental truth about the world that we live in, that U.S. imperialism is in decline. And we can see all sorts of examples of that. We can see that even amongst the U.S. allies, the imperialist allies that the U.S. has, that there's really no honor amongst thieves, that the U.S. is hoarding supplies, trying to hoard masks, and really not cooperating. That's evidenced by their withdrawal from international organizations like the WHO. So really the U.S. is becoming more and more isolated. Its position in the world is becoming weaker because of the crisis. And we've even seen some of the junior partners in imperialism performing much better than the United States. For example, New Zealand, South Korea are doing infinitely better than the United States is in response to the crisis. And we've also seen that some US allies like Italy have turned to socialist countries like China for assistance.
Yeah, and there's a stark contrast between the way the United States, as an imperialist country, as a capitalist country, has dealt with this pandemic and has dealt with this crisis, as opposed to those countries with, a centralized, planned economy. We saw China just recently. It's returning back to normal now. Cities in China are getting back on their feet. They were able to really deal with this crisis in a very humane, people-centered way. And now is starting to, as opposed to the United States, which is hoarding a bunch of materials, we're seeing China go into other countries and assist them in whatever way they can, selling masks to places or giving masks away and selling them to different countries like Italy, for example. We've seen Cuba, which, for years, for decades, Cuba has led the way in, assisting other countries when it comes to medical and healthcare issues. And Cuba's been sending doctors across the globe, right, across to countries where the pandemic has been the worst, right? So, in Vietnam, we've seen the lowest death rate. I think we saw one person died of the COVID-19. So we're seeing that in these socialist people over profits centered countries, we're seeing this pandemic actually be dealt with in a much more humane and a much more organized way, and in a way where it's actually being limited. The effects of the pandemic are being limited. And to contrast that with the United States, who's spending billions and billions of dollars every day during the pandemic, right? During this moment where we can't get enough ventilators, where we can't get enough masks, where we can't build enough hospitals. What happened? Trump bought a bunch of new fighter jets for $4.8 billion. That was 2 weeks ago. And so we're spending and increasing military budgets in the middle of this pandemic, when the real war we should be fighting is against this healthcare monster that's attacking the working class, and in particularly, more devastating in Black and brown communities, right? So we should be putting money into this war that's attacking our own working class. Instead, we're getting bombs to drop over working class citizens of other countries. Furthermore, we have sanctions on a bunch of countries right now who are dealing with this pandemic: Venezuela, Iran, Zimbabwe. We have all of these various countries that are also dealing with this global pandemic and are being limited. Their hands are tied behind their back because the United States is imposing these unilateral sanctions on them in the middle of a global crisis, at a time when leaders at the UN and multiple international health organizations have said that the international community should stop all sanctions, that it is inhumane to have sanctions in the middle of a global pandemic. But US imperialism doesn't like to sleep, and it has no conscience. So even in the middle of this pandemic, we're spending billions and trillions on war, and we're looking to cripple those countries that stand in the way of US imperialism, countries like Venezuela, Iran, Zimbabwe, and Nicaragua.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the more dangerous things to come out of the COVID-19 crisis is this acceleration towards conflict with China that we've seen from all sectors of the ruling class in the US. I think it started with Trump calling coronavirus the Chinese virus. And he's even gone as far as to start spreading, totally false rumors that this virus started in a Chinese laboratory. And really what he was doing was trying to deflect from his own inadequacies and try to blame it on someone else. And of course, what has gone along with that is, as always, racist attacks against Asian Americans at home. Just like in the war with Iraq, when Arab Americans came under attack, the same thing is happening now as we rev up towards war with China. And we've seen, of course, the Democrats can't, go without getting some skin in the game. So Joe Biden has also been ramping up anti-China rhetoric, and he's actually attacking Trump in his presidential ads by saying Trump was not hard enough on China. So if you can believe it or not, he's trying to attack Trump from the right on the issue of China. And then, of course, this has all been enforced by our media, who has been constantly insinuating that we can't trust what China is saying, that we can't believe any statistics that come out of China. And so we've created this echo chamber, which really feels like the drums of war are beating, and it's reminiscent of what happened in 2003. And what we need to realize is that this strategy is not coming out of the COVID-19 crisis, because we have seen that it's part of a long-term strategy, the pivot to Asia. That's what it was called under President Obama, and now we're seeing it accelerate because of this crisis. So I think that's where we wanted to leave it.
Yeah, so we're going to continue organizing against U.S. imperialism, sanctions, and the U.S. continuing to expand its military efforts abroad during this pandemic. And, we hope that folks who are interested in getting involved in that can seek us out in Power South Florida.
Thank you so much, Cassia and Connor, for talking about the US versus socialist response and what that kind of looks like today and what that might look like for the future. The prospect of war with China is absolutely terrifying and unnecessary, but the empire will do anything it can to stay alive. But with that, we're going to go ahead and move on to our Q&A section. For those of you who are still here with us, please send in your questions into the comment section of the live video, and you can address it to a certain speaker or to all the speakers, and we'll see who wants to take it, etc. And we can answer those questions. But while you all are sending in those questions, if you would like, I actually have a couple questions already that we can go ahead and talk about. So the first one is for Olga. What can people do to support healthcare workers? Just like, you know, people like us who are not.
Hi, Liz. Thanks for the question. Well, I've been receiving like love from people from the community, from everybody pretty much in the city, which is amazing. And I'm very grateful. Every time I walk to work, I can hear everybody like screaming and like you guys are heroes, you're amazing, you're doing a great job, which is perfect. I'm very grateful for it. And it lifts my spirit every time I go to work. I think what it can help is just talking about this situation pretty much and organizing and trying to connect with the workers. In my situation in the hospital is complicated because we don't have a union, and they also told us that if you get involved with the union, you'll be fired. So pretty much it's on that level. So I don't know how I can bring politics into work, but not like politics directly, but also talk about work conditions and everything. But what I think you guys like what you can do to help is just we can use the social media as a way to interact with workers, maybe post things and bring it to attention to the public. Also, events like that also helps us to keep updated. And I think it's just for us that work in a hospital without a union, we're pretty much stuck. But I've been in connect with people from politics and everything, try to organize things from inside. But a way to support is just find out a hospital in your community, for example, that is struggling right now without PPE. And you guys can maybe do a fundraising or something, some event, and maybe get donations for those people, like for masks. Sometimes we need gowns. Some of the workers, they need food. They're working in conditions where I have a couple of co-workers who are living in a shelter right now. They're struggling as well. So I don't think only about me, also about people who are struggling. So maybe events that can fundraise to help these workers and the hospitals. And also talk about this. We can use the internet and the social media as a way to talk about those problems. Because in our hospital, we're talking more about politics from things that we see in the other hospitals, from the nurses, from the unions. So we're kind of thinking, why not do something like that here? We kind of can do a little protest and try to organize. Of course, obeying the chain of command. If I have anything in my unit that I need to improve, I try to talk among with my coworkers and bring to the manager and the director. And we try to do whatever we can, but what you guys can do to help could be fundraising, helping to get PPEs, and maybe talking to maybe one or two or three workers from each hospital to get a sense of what's going on, especially if they don't have a union. Maybe it would be a way to start. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Olga, for your response to that question. We actually got another question in the chat while you were speaking. And that question is for Cassia and Connor. or I'm going to assume it's for Cassie and Connor because it has to do with the international situation. So, what are your thoughts on China and Africa relations during the pandemic? If you have anything you would like to say about that.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have very many thoughts on it. I think that that's kind of up for the people of Africa, is what they want their relationship with China to be. More so, what we were kind of focused on is the U.S.-China relationship and what kind of relationship we want to have with China. But what I will say is that I'm sure if the people of Africa don't want to have a relationship with China, then they'll let them know that. And they can resolve that between themselves. Sorry, I couldn't be of more help.
No, you're totally good. Thank you so much for giving that answer, though. It is a complicated question to talk about other people that you can't, control the will of or the political situation for them, So thank you for answering that thoughtfully. But actually, I have a question for you, Cassie and Connor, and that is, do you see a international realignment of powers after this crisis is over? Like right now, there's all these, extreme tensions going on. Do you see that changing, or if so, how do you see it changing?
I think people are really starting to see the United States for what it is. I mean, I believe that when Trump took office, his presidency sort of ripped off the mask, not to use a COVID-19 term, but sort of ripped off the mask from US imperialism and showed people really what the US is all about. And I think this pandemic has further done so and has further revealed the US, what am I looking for? U.S. greed for what it is, and the wish to sort of what am I looking for? Like to sort of keep its own power and to stay within and put itself first, as opposed to looking at a global scale to try and assist the people and countries of the world. I think people are starting to see that the U.S. also is just incapable of dealing with the crisis itself. It's been unable to assist people within our own country. We have the highest death rate. We have the least capable administration and government, I think, of all the countries of the world right now, and people are seeing that. And they can contrast that to a country like China, which was able to handle the crisis very well. And we're starting to see people sort of look to China and other countries for that guidance instead of the United States.
Yeah, I think that's correct. And the only thing I would add is I think that just to use a political term, we're in a multipolar world. So there's more than one great power in the world, more than one very strong nation now. And I think that this situation is more reminiscent of what we had during the Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union, rather than the situation that's existed where the U.S. has been the dominant superpower in the world. So I would say yes, in answer to the question.
And when you see emerging imperial powers, usually start to see more aggression, right?
Yeah,
and that's
exactly.
why we're nervous about those war drums being beaten toward China.
Yeah, thank you so much for answering that question. Yeah, I think it's really interesting to see. You mentioned this earlier whenever you were talking about it, but speaking about how many U.S. allies are now turning to China and how I don't know. That's really like a big reason for the United States to go after China. It's not legitimate because the United States is a leech on other economies, but I think that China's development, right? It's not a question of whether or not they are trying to become the United States or have the same kind of parasitic relationship, but rather that in general they're just developing, right? Like China is the foremost, what was considered like a backwards country. Like look where China is today compared to say India, right? Or even if we look at any of the other BRIC countries, like if we looked at Brazil, like what is happening in Brazil today, what's happening in China is incredible. and is definitely going to change the international situation. So thank you so much again for answering that question. I think that the international situation is going to become all the more relevant in the coming years, truly. But we have a kind of two-parter for Olga again. And the first part of the question is going to be, what are your thoughts, or no, that's the wrong one. What is now the treatment standard for COVID in your hospital? And then the second part, are you allowed to use the chloroquine / azithromycin treatment if a patient wants it?
Okay, thanks for the questions. For what I've been seeing at my job, I heard that for each hospital, they have their own policy. And their own, maybe, I was about to say, never mind, in their own first line of treatment. But in the hospital that I work, I've seen them, the protocols use the hydrochloroquine, and also working, that's gonna work alongside, that can be azithromycin, or another one that I forgot the name right now. And it's just, I don't think all the hospitals are using hydrochloroquine because it's still in trial. It's a medication that it's very effective. It's proven to be effective in the treatment of SARS that we had in the past. And also it's a great medication used in Latin America to treat malaria and other diseases. It's still in process. It's still being tested. They've been doing in my hospital, and so far the outcome is positive, but it's something that we shouldn't tell people just to do randomly. In some cases, for example, in Brazil and Latin America, people are drinking hydrochloroquine medication without doctor's order, without being properly treated, and that's when it comes to a point where we really have to be careful how we give this information to the public. It's being tested, and that takes time when you're doing these kind of trials for medication, also for vaccine. But I've been seeing people being treated with the hydrochloroquine, and you have to be careful because you have to watch for the patient's vital signs. It can have many side effects with that, such as diarrhea and also cardiac problems. So it's a medication that also can be dangerous, and it has to be done in a proper way. It has to be used, and the patient has to be treated in a proper way, not in a perfect setting, hospital setting. Thank you.
Thank you, Olga. We appreciate you answering that question, but we had a couple more come in the meantime. I'm going to go ahead and push another question, which is for Gage first, and that is, has there been any coordination between Teamsters and non-affiliated workers in the Amazon supply chain strikes? And after this question is answered, we will go back to, well, it could be Cass and Connor, or it could be any of the other speakers if they also wanted to comment on it. But go ahead, Gage.
Okay, so the short answer to the question is no. Basically, the problem is that the Teamsters is run by a class collaborationist labor leader, Jimmy Hoffa Jr., who basically is only interested in sort of maintaining a status quo. He's heavily invested in not only capitalism, but literally the Donald Trump administration. He's lent his full support to Donald Trump's response to the coronavirus, pandemic. And so I think that if we do, which I do think it's important, UPS Teamsters need to organize Amazon. If we had organized Amazon, we would also have UPS, and we would have a significant amount of the delivery power of the whole country sort of unionized with us. And I do think that in 2021, there is going to be a new Teamster election for the president of the Teamsters, and Sean O'Brien and Fred Zuckerman are running on a Teamsters United slate to seize that leadership. And I think that they will push to fight for, organizing Amazon and partaking in these larger actions. Because the fact of the matter is that, Teamsters are some of the most strategically placed workers in the whole economy. And if we are able to organize and fight, then we can actually win really easily, in my opinion, actually. So, that's my answer. It's not a yes, it's a no. But hopefully in 2021. What the hell is that?
Thank you very much, Gage, for answering that question. Before, actually, I know we just said that we were going to go back to Cass and Connor if they wanted to, or someone else, but I actually have a question for Rachel. And I've been wondering, you listed off these very good and important demands, and I was wondering, what has the response been of like the people living in Jacksonville to your campaign?
Well, I think, as always, there's some mixed responses. I think when we had our Caravan Protest, we were pleasantly surprised how many folks showed up. Lots of people we knew. We worked with some other orgs in the area, but also some folks that we didn't know that just happened to see on different people's social media, and they showed up to show support. There obviously has been, people who are against this as well, who definitely want like people to stay incarcerated, but that's like, to be expected. But I think that we've seen more support than we even previously expected, which is good. So I hope that those living in Jacksonville who, are on board and in support of these local demands are, putting in the time to make those phone calls, which I think is really critical, calling our state attorney, Melissa Nelson, calling the sheriff's office, calling Mike Williams, with JSO, and putting in the time to, make these phone calls. And so I think that we see a lot of people in support, of course, that we see people who are against it as well, and who are very sensitive around this like topic, who become like really defensive and saying that, if people broke the law, they need to learn their lesson, et cetera, which is just, not a critical approach whatsoever. But I think that, at least from my perspective, that we have been pleased to see that there is like a lot of support around this campaign, and we hope to see that grow in our next steps and moving forward.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for answering that question. We have a couple more, so I'm going to try and keep on rolling. And once again, we're going now to Cass and Connor, if you would like to answer this question. And that is, what are your thoughts on COVID being blamed on Africans living in China, if you have anything to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, the China-Africa question seems to be the hot topic. I'm going to have to do some more research myself. I have seen those reports, and I think that that's obviously terrible. And unfortunately, if we look at the broader context, COVID is encouraging all sorts of racist ideas. I mean, if you look at in our own country, you see the racist attacks against Asian Americans. And so you can see that there's kind of a parallel there. And for us, the question is, who benefits from these ideas? Who's encouraging these ideas? And how to fight against them? And so, I mean, I really would have to investigate more to comment further. But obviously, it's terrible.
Certainly. Thank you very much for responding to that. Did anybody else, any of our other speakers, want to comment on that, if you have any knowledge about that? If not, then we will go ahead and move forward to the next question. And actually, this one is now for Taylor. And I'm wondering, why do you think USF administration is responding in the way that they are, right? You mentioned that they have this very poor response to workers and students alike on campus. I mean, ostensibly, that's what admin is there for. So I'm confused as to why they would respond in that way.
That's a very interesting question. Yeah, USF has been responding terribly for both students and workers. Just for a little bit of background, they also Chrisley mentioned in the comments that something I left out of my presentation, because I don't work at USF, but they like spent forever and covered up cases of COVID-19 at USF. And they like took forever to allow people to work it from home, that if they were able to. And then we also have the AFSCME demands of, you know, paid leave for workers and also closing non-essential departments of USF. And then on the student side, they've also they waited until the last minute to shut down school. They've like slowly like rolled out like updates and refunds for students. People were supposed to get refunds for their housing like weeks ago, but they are just now getting them. And USF has been giving like everybody at USF like a lot of problems. And why do I think USF administration has been acting this way? I think they want to maximize their profits. I think their USF administration and any university administration is supposed to be here for like the students, but I think the reality is they are just a section of the bourgeoisie or the ruling capitalist class where they want to maximize their profits. You know, I think universities under capitalism run as like businesses. I think especially going to USF, it runs exactly like a company. It's extremely difficult to get any resources for students, and yeah, it's really disgusting. And I think they act like that because they're just trying to maximize profits. They're not trying to lose any money or too much money during this time, and they want things to continue as normal. They still have plans. They are very wholeheartedly wanting to open back up in the fall. And yeah, I think it's really disgusting, the kind of inner workings of our universities that kind of market themselves for like the students and like a safe haven for students and workers. But when you really look into it, they really only care about their money. And yeah, they just want people to work so they can keep getting and exploiting the labor of those workers. Thank you for the question, by the way.
Absolutely. You know, I think that oftentimes universities are just viewed as like this safe haven for knowledge, and it's like a rite of passage into adulthood. But you know, we know that that's like fake, and it's exactly as you said, Taylor. They're a business and they want money. So just like we see, you know, UPS using and abusing us as workers, we see that USF is going to do the exact same thing. Here's a question, and this is kind of to everyone, but how can we continue fighting for workers' rights in the midst of mass layoffs during the crisis? I mean, I think that there's kind of like this argument happening where we're not supposed to fight back because we should fear the virus, right? We're not supposed to go against the U.S. government because they're trying to help us, etc. You know, if we fight for jobs, are we not putting ourselves at risk for you know, getting the virus? It's a complicated question, and I think it's worthy of being answered. If you all had any ideas, whoever would like to speak. Okay.
I was just going to make one quick comment, I think, just in response to that. And I know that there can be a lot more said about this, but I think like exploring options of mutual aid is really important. And it's important to remember that like mutual aid doesn't mean like charity or volunteer work, but that it's self-organized, it's racially inclusive, it's separate from and or against, you know, the state, and that it's a responsive act. But that's just one small comment if anyone else wants to make comments in response.
If anybody else would like to answer that question, please do.
Just adding to that, I think that's a great question, and also it's hard for the workers, the ones that they're laid off right now. Also, people who lost their jobs to go outside and fight in the midst to organize with the local communities. Also try to talk to your neighbors to see if you can do something in your neighborhood or in your community. Also, if you have a party or like FRSO, you can also talk, among ourselves, ways to fight back. For now, we can use the internet, social media. Also see a lot of people they've been driving around doing like mini protests around the city. It's a way, if you drive, trying to organize something like that with a group, just pick a cause and try to organize on that to speak up, because we cannot be afraid. The situation is frightening, but they want to use this as a way for us to keep quiet and just accept any proposal that they have for us. Right now we have like how many millions of people unemployed in the line for applying for unemployment right now in US. So that's how desperate they are and how bad the situation is. So we cannot like silence faith during this situation. So the only way to fight back is organizing. Try to talk to your local communities. Try to find a party, FRSO, for example. And try to talk to your friends in a way that you can, help each other. Charity is amazing, volunteering work is amazing, but also something that's related to a class, that you can talk about politics and things like that.
Thank you. That was very thoughtful. Yeah, I think a real way to move forward is going to have to be this organizing, you know what I mean? And once again, thank you, Rachel, for your response. We have a question for Rachel, but would anybody else like to answer the last question I asked?
Yeah, definitely. Just one thing, looking historically in 1929 during the Great Depression, the Communist Party USA actually, going back just a little bit more, unemployment is like a big issue for the labor movement, because when there's high unemployment, there is very low the wages drop, and people are used as scabs, obviously, and other things. So it's actually like it's a pretty big predicament for the labor movement. However, the Communist Party USA in 1929, during the Great Depression, organized the unemployed. That was their mission, was to organize the unemployed, and they fought for unemployment benefits and other economic support, as well as organized against crossing picket lines and fighting in support of the labor movement. So I definitely think that the best way to go about organizing the labor movement in the context of high unemployment means very broad organizing done with both the unemployed as well as the labor movement in conjunction with one another. So yeah, that's my little answer.
Absolutely. Thanks again for answering that question. Like in the beginning, whenever I was talking about May Day and how that is not dissimilar from the situation that we have today. I mean, of course, we're dealing with a crisis, but insofar as people are still, oppressed and being repressed by the United States government, that means that we can actively change our condition so long as we look to history and learn the important lessons from it. Namely that our power comes from our numbers, namely that our power comes from our ability to create everything in society and make this whole thing work. I think it was Taylor who said that we're the ones who make it happen. We're the only reason why this country keeps going, the essential workers, and I think that that's obviously still the case. But now we're going to go ahead and move on to that question for Rachel, and the question is, what do you think about the recent bill Pensacola Representative Matt Gaetz filed mandating the deportation of all undocumented immigrants? what actions can we take in this time of social distancing?
Well, I think that's, really heinous, of course. It's really difficult to think about like what acts. I think that like working with immigrant families for so long, as well as just doing advocate work surrounding immigration, it sometimes feels difficult to even like think of what responses we can give, because we feel so helpless and we see just legislation passing around us that happens so quickly. Especially, this has been a problem forever, but this administration is really, but anyway, so what I think that we can do in response to that, I mean, I think like the biggest thing, like thinking of like a mass line, like something that everyone could do, is just to call like your representatives, to flood people's, leave messages, email. Like you really want to contact these folks who have like the power surrounding these bills. Call as many times as you can. Look up local numbers, look up the numbers that represent your state, and really get in touch with these folks surrounding these policies and legislation that's being passed. Of course, you can like get involved in your own community and support different people who are doing that work. But I think that that's probably the most powerful thing like the everyday person can do in response to that.
Just real quick, I was wondering, what do you think of I've seen a trend recently among people in other cities. I don't think anything like that has happened in Tampa, at least, about car caravans and about, kind of massive protests with your vehicles, which seems to qualify as social distancing. I don't know. What do you think about that? Is that a possibility here?
Well, like I mentioned earlier when I was speaking, we recently did have a caravan protest in Jacksonville, and it was very successful. We basically set up, we taped signs to the sides of our vehicles, and we circled the Duval County Jail, many times for about 30 minutes, honking our horns and playing music in different cars. And I think it was a very successful demonstration. And I think that a lot of people, we had lots of news coverage, and I think a lot of people were able to kind of like see the message that we were trying to get across. So we were even like discussing afterwards that like this is a type of protest we can even like use in a slightly altered way in the future as well, like a mix between folks in cars doing a caravan and then folks outside. Of course, this time for social distancing, everyone stayed in their cars. But I think that it can be a very successful way to have a demonstration or to do a protest. I think we've seen, I don't know if you guys have, but I know like locally for us, we've seen a lot of right-wing protests where people are like all together, not even really following social distancing guidelines. But I think that what we did last Friday, it seemed to be a really successful kind of demonstration for us, even more so than we expected. So I do think that it's a good idea.
Thank you very much, Rachel. And yeah, that sounds like a really effective way to organize. Honestly, I hope that we can do something like that in Tampa in the near future. The last time that we had a protest, it was with, Gage was there too. He talked about it during his little presentation. And unfortunately, at that time, we were trying to social distance along the sidewalk, but we were still in person. But also, it was just, it's not the best to do that. So hopefully in the future, we'll be able to get our cars and do something like that. Of course, we had that rally protest before this car caravan kind of organizing trend started. So I think it's a really innovative way to do things now.
Yeah, if I may add, sorry.
Go ahead.
Tampa Bay SDS actually had a general meeting today. We've been meeting virtually every week, and we've actually taken huge inspiration to all of the car caravan kind of events that are happening, especially Jacksonville's last week. So we're actually hoping to have a car caravan protest at USF within the next couple weeks, because USF isn't providing, this is more for undocumented students, USF isn't providing any kind of scholarships or any grants for undocumented students in light of the pandemic. So we're hoping to have a car caravan for to demand that USF offer some sort of aid to undocumented students. So yeah, I think it's a great way of organizing right now.
May I add something quick?
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
I saw a picture this morning about a May Day kind of protest in Greece, where they organized like many workers, like they're together in a place, but they kept that 6 feet distancing from one another with masks and everything. So I don't know, I didn't read the article, but I don't know how long they stay there, but at least it could be something that you can think about to do in the future. Eventually, to have everybody, but like keeping social distancing, kind of far away from each other, wearing masks, and of course, maybe for a couple of minutes, like 10, 15 minutes, and everybody, go home or whatever. So could think about something like that maybe in the future. Just an idea. Thank you.
No, thank you. I think that's another interesting point. You got me thinking here. Recently, at UPS, where Gage and I work, and where we've been organizing to get PPE, we managed to win N95s like in the beginning. But as the crisis has continued, and supplies all over the United States are dwindling. Plus, the United States doesn't want to buy from China, even though China has sent billions, yes, B with a B, billions of masks to the United States over the past couple of weeks, right? But the United States still is trying to limit that as much as possible. So at UPS, where we're working, we're now to the point where all N95 masks that we could have had, and it's not like there's a ton of people working here, and it's not like we're in an environment where perhaps soiling our mask would be like super, super easy. Like, you know what I mean? If healthcare workers can reuse their mask a couple of times, UPS workers can reuse their mask. But now we're to the point where UPS doesn't have any N95s, no KN95s, and is instead trying to just give people, what am I looking for, like surgical masks, right? And if only some people are wearing surgical masks and not everyone in the building, then there is a really good chance that those surgical masks aren't even going to matter in the end. I mean, you know far more about this question than I do, right? I mean, would you say that's correct, right? Like if only a couple people have surgical masks, that it's not nearly as effective as if some people were to have like N95s or KN95s.
I think the idea is for everybody to be wary, just to be on the safe side, because you don't know who has maybe have COVID-19. So I don't want to encourage people to go out and especially protest, without a mask, because it's gonna look bad on us, and also putting that person and everybody else at risk. So the idea was to get them, the right amount of PPE for everybody.
Thank you for answering that. But with that, we don't really have any more questions. So we're going to go ahead and close this out. Thank you to all of the speakers who came on today. And thank you for the incredible work that you're doing in your communities and your workplaces. It's necessary, right? And without it, we would be in a really tough situation. So to kind of go off, I want to go back to the very beginning whenever I introduce this whole thing and say that the point of this program, even though it got a little rough in the beginning and we were having problems with the technical side, this video isn't meant to be, shimmer and shine. This video is meant to be an inspiration and a way for you to learn that you can fight back too, right? If only a couple of us are doing this, a whole heck lot more of us would be so much more effective. So today, let's leave here with the idea that, you know, if you dare to struggle, you dare to win. That is, you have to fight in order to win, even if there's a chance of you losing. But so far, you know, I can say from my experience at UPS, we can clearly see from the other people who have spoken today that there are some good fights going on, and that we're not going to go down easy, and that this crisis isn't going to conquer us, but rather we're going to root out the problem of it ultimately, which is the ruling class of this country. So thank you all so much again for coming on to this live stream, and we appreciate every one of you that stayed on. And with that, please, if you have the desire to learn more about the Freedom Road Socialist Organization, you can visit FRSO.org. That's FRSO.org. And if you would like to see a progressive news source, news and views from the people's struggle, you can visit Fight Back News. What is it? Fightbacknews.org as well. Yeah, it's a .org. So please visit fightbacknews.org and FRSO.org if you would like to know more or would like to get involved in our organizing. Thank you very much again. We hope that the rest of you have excellent May Day and will continue to fight into the future. Thank you.